Hey there, this is Jexy with the Systems Alliance, and in this video we're going to go over the news that you may have heard that over 50% of all the negative talk online regarding Star Wars The Last Jedi was done by Russian bots. If you read the study, this might be another one of those situations that you might call fake news. So you may have seen the headlines online. They're saying over 50% of all the negative tweets or online posts, whatever it is regarding Star Wars The Last Jedi was actually done by Russian bots. So that's obviously the nice headline. That obviously validates a lot of people's arguments, including the director Rian Johnson. But is it actually true? Now you might say, well, they did a research paper. Of course it's true, but you have to look at the actual research paper. Where did they come up with these people? How are the tweets verified or picked out? Who deemed them negative, positive, neutral, a bot? Whatever it is, we need to dig a little deeper into this because I think this is letting Rian Johnson off the hook as well as Star Wars The Last Jedi in terms of how fans really feel about it. I think the performance of Solo kind of shows you what people think about the Star Wars universe right now. And Solo lost about $250 million. Lost. $250 million. So the state of Star Wars is still very bad. But like I said, let's dig a little bit deeper into this. So a man by the name of Morton Bay is a researcher out of Southern Cal, and he did a very extensive study on Star Wars The Last Jedi and the social media circus that surrounded it. His paper is titled Weaponizing the Haters: The Last Jedi and the Strategic Politicalization of Pop Culture Through Social Media Manipulation. His abstract reads as follows. Political discourse on social media is seen by many as polarized, vitriolic, and permeated by falsehoods and misinformation. Political operators have exploited all of these aspects in the discourse for strategic purposes, most famously during the Russian social media influence campaign during the 2016 presidential election in the United States, and current similar efforts targeting the U.S. elections in 2018 and 2020. The results of the social media study presented in this paper presents evidence that political influence through manipulation of social media discussions is no longer exclusive to political debate and can now also be found in pop culture. Specifically, this study examines a collection of tweets related to a much-publicized fan dispute over Star Wars franchise film Episode 8, The Last Jedi. The study finds evidence of deliberate, organized political influence measures disguised as fan arguments. The likely objective of these measures is increasing media coverage of the fandom conflict, thereby adding to and further propagating a narrative of widespread discord and dysfunction in American society. Persuading voters of this narrative remains a strategic goal of the U.S. alt-right movement, as well as the Russian Federation. The results of the study show that among those who addressed The Last Jedi director Rian Johnson directly on Twitter to express their dissatisfaction, more than half are bots, trolls, sock puppets, or political activists using the debate to propagate political messages supporting extreme right-wing causes and the discrimination of gender, race, or sexuality. A number of these users appear to be Russian trolls. The paper concludes that while it is only a minority of Twitter accounts that tweet negatively about The Last Jedi, organized attempts at politicizing the pop culture discourse on social media for strategic purposes are significant enough that users should be made aware of these measures so they can act accordingly. Now, this is his abstract in his paper. This is what we're supposed to take away from this. And this is pretty much what most of the media outlets have gone to and read and said, this is 100% fact, this is how it is. No one wants to read 300 pages of his actual study or how he came up with the numbers or anything like that. That's a little bit too difficult. But it makes for great headlines. It serves someone's narrative, so it fits within their current beliefs, so that way they feel validated, and that way they feel like, yep, this is why it happened. I knew this was the cause, but you kind of dig a little bit deeper into it to see exactly how this study was actually done. So first thing, what was actually analyzed? The only data that was actually analyzed was tweets directed only at Rian Johnson's Twitter account. So obviously you have other famous people out there. You just have regular tweets that are out there between friends and just people talking about Star Wars. These are only tweets directed at the director Rian Johnson. Now, I know most of the conversation around The Last Jedi, while it may include talk about the director Rian Johnson, most people aren't directly contacting Rian Johnson about this. Only the super angry are contacting Rian Johnson about it. People who just don't like the movie, don't like portions that have nothing to do with gender or ethnicity or anything like that. Maybe they didn't like that Leia suddenly turned into a superhero and flew through space. Maybe they didn't like the fact that they jumped to warp speed and took out an entire fleet. by doing it. I mean, there's a lot of things to not like about The Last Jedi, and that's mostly what I hear. I don't normally hear about the social justice warrior aspect of it. It's obviously there. It's obviously a loud minority. But when talking with real Star Wars fans, I don't normally hear that. I hear about Kathleen Kennedy and Rian Johnson and the way they've treated fans, the way they've spoken down about the whole Star Wars community, the way they say, if you don't like it, you must be sexist. If you don't like Star Wars, you must be racist. When in reality, maybe they just didn't like the movie. And if this were true, if it were really all about Russia or bots, then Solo probably would have done better. The critics may not have liked it as much as The Last Jedi, but the fans almost seem to, at least the few that saw it, since it didn't make nearly as much money as any Star Wars film ever. In fact, any live-action Star Wars film that's been theatrically released have all grossed over $1 billion. And Solo is around $400 million. Not even close, and it was the most expensive Star Wars movie ever. So the production budget, advertising budget, now of course they basically had to reshoot 80% of the movie, which is why it cost so much. But the point is, cost a ton of money, lost a ton of money. That's never happened in Star Wars before. Is it Star Wars fatigue? Are people burnt out? Do they just want something new? Or are they just not great movies and have a lot of flaws in them, flaws that bother people to the point where they don't want them? Personally, while these new Star Wars movies look great, I almost prefer the prequels. In fact, I do prefer the prequels over these new ones, if you want to call it these new batch that Disney has owned versus what George Lucas had. The prequels, to me, at least have heart, story. They didn't beat you over the head with stuff. Things made sense. I can't believe I almost wish for that scroll crawl that talks about the Trade Federation and all of that. I mean, who'd have thought I'd want that over the new stuff, but I kind of miss it. Is the Phantom Menace still bad? Yes. But at least I felt like I was in totally different worlds. I don't really get that same feeling with the new Star Wars movies. Rogue One was kind of the exception to that, and for me, Rogue One is the best movie to come out in the Disney era. But let's not go all into that. Let's focus on this study. The news outlets are saying that Star Wars has a Russian troll problem, but really it's a lot more complicated than that. So the researcher, Morin Bey, he's done studies on social media in the Trump era, Russian bots, fake news, journalism in the media, social media ethics, and yeah, he's a Star Wars fan. So this kind of fits right in to what he's looking for. And Russian bots or not, you talk to anyone, some people love The Last Jedi, some people like it and say they have problems with it, some people don't really care one way or the other, some people don't really care for the movie, like myself, and some people absolutely hate The Last Jedi. And just in my personal interaction, seems to be pretty split. And it's been pretty rough online. Kelly Marie Tran, who played Rose Tico, she left social media because of all the backlash she was getting. And to me, I think that's terrible. She didn't do anything wrong in the movie. I've heard some people talk about the fact that they thought it was a weird love interest, that why is this movie even going in that direction, to then basically not even be fulfilled at all. So that was a little bit odd, but she wasn't a bad actor or anything like that in the movie. In fact, if you want to blame anything, blame the director. Blame the writers. They're the ones who had that character there. She didn't do anything wrong. She's just an actor playing a role in a movie. Don't hate on her. And of course, you may have heard that there's a bunch of fans who want to remake The Last Jedi altogether, which, yeah, sounds pretty ridiculous. I know they were getting like a GoFundMe page or something like that, and a lot of people made fun of them. Hey, if you want to do all that CG and edit some parts to make it make a little more sense, go for it. I still have faith that they could fix Star Wars with the next episode. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can just say either one never happened or just ignore that it did happen. And that's pretty much all they can do right now, as long as they put out a good movie that actually goes into characters or tells a story. Because at this point, we don't really have any attachment to any of the characters because we don't really know them. So while the goal of this research is pretty noble, trying to figure out exactly what's going on in Star Wars, it's really not definitive at all, as the media would have you believe in their headlines. So let's go into it. As he said, 50.9% of all the tweets that were tweeting negatively about The Last Jedi were likely to be politically motivated or not even human. That's pretty much your headline right there. So Bey collected 1,273 tweets off of Twitter's advanced search function. And when you talk about polls or trying to figure anything out, that 1273 number is pretty accurate to be within, 3 or 4 points of where you need to be to make a conclusion about most things. The difference is normally that number is made up of an equal equal amount of people over the entire United States or an entire state or everything. This isn't all of social media. These are just tweets directed at Ryan Johnson. So there's your first problem right there. Then after cleaning the data set, whatever that means, he was left with about 967 tweets. So already pretty small sample size. And here's the other thing, the human aspect. He manually, aka himself, determined whether a tweet was politically motivated, negative, a bot, neutral, or positive. And to separate the negative tweets out even more, he would search through their accounts, the ones with high activity at least, for keywords such as SJW, for social justice warriors, and Trump. So not exactly the best way to vet anything. And what if you find that word? What does it mean? Well, according to him, it would tell you if you're either on the left or the right. Now, I've seen people on the left and the right use SJW. I've seen people on the left and the right use Trump. So not really sure we're thinking about this in the most accurate way if this is how we're determining what's negative and what's positive. But let's keep going with this. Of the 967 tweets, only 206 expressed a negative sentiment towards the director Ryan Johnson. So already we're analyzing 206 tweets. That's it. That's not a sample size for anything. And to make a determination or a bunch of headlines off of that, a little irresponsible. But let's still roll with this. Of the 206, 61 were reported to be real people with a political agenda. 11 were bots, and only 33 appeared to be trolls. Of those 33, just 16% appeared to possess the characteristics of Russian troll accounts. So in reality, less than 1 in 10, less than 10%, we're in the single digits here, less than 10% were actually from Russian troll accounts. Way less than the slightly over 50% that's being reported literally everywhere. Just type in Moreton Bay Star Wars and look at all the headlines that pop up. Over 50%, they all say the same thing. So let's go into the problems. As I already mentioned, you're only analyzing tweets at Ryan Johnson. There's problem number one. If you want to look at tweets, you should analyze any tweet that mentions The Last Jedi and see what they say. Then take a sample of those and analyze who's tweeting, and then see what percentage of those might be bots. But this is just at Ryan Johnson. So other Twitter accounts like Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker, none of the tweets at them were analyzed at all. And he has almost triple the followers as Ryan Johnson. So given that, there's a significant gap in the research base that was ignored during this paper. In fact, Ryan Johnson caught wind of this paper himself, and he actually responded to it. He said, "What the top line describes is consistent with my experience online." So of course it's consistent with his online experience. It's literally his online experience that's being analyzed here. So why wouldn't it be consistent with his online experience? That's literally the only thing the study is covering. So the fact that he's coming out and validating this study literally means nothing, because it is a study about stuff directed at him, his own Twitter account. So while it's true that over half of the negative tweets, 105 out of just 206, were classified as politically motivated bots or Russian trolls, the actual report pretty much diluted this entire message and lumped all of these negative reactions together. So yeah, it helped tell a certain narrative, but it wasn't very accurate to what the study actually revealed. Now, Moreton Bay in his study actually says it's less comprehensive in nature than a study would generally want to be, and says that his research has limitations. Specifically, he limited himself to what he was actually researching. So I wouldn't be accusing Moreton Bay of picking a political narrative himself and coming up with these conclusions during his research. I'm not saying that's what he did. However, the way it was presented is pretty inaccurate, considering less than 10% is what it really came out to, and more than 50% is what he said it came out to. But let's be honest, if the headline said less than 10% of tweets directed at just Ryan Johnson's Twitter account alone were done by Russian trolls or bots, that's not really nearly as exciting. I don't think that's making headlines. I don't think anyone's caring. In fact, that less than 10% number kind of correlates with the number of Russian trolls or bots on anything that's being talked about a lot in American society. So the fact that they latched onto this Star Wars movie, it really isn't that much different than anything else. He explained that, quote, "Having worked in journalism for many years, I know how this game works." And he even said he is moderately disappointed in some of the major media brands that ran articles without taking the time to get a little deeper. He understands that some of his findings were buried because they produced less enticing lead than Russian troll army invading the Star Wars galaxy. That's just not what the research suggests, though. So really the conclusion here is pretty interesting. So in an era when fake news and misinformation are permeating every facet, our daily lives, so that we can't really get away from it. No one knows what's true, what's not. He's supposedly supposed to come out with a study that's going to say, oh, hey, we caught the fake news guys. We caught the Russian bots. And yet his own work was widespread. Why? Because it appealed to the media's narrative, except it wasn't true. And that in and of itself is pretty disappointing. Not only to people who actually read the research, but to himself. So let me know what you think about this. Are you still in the camp that thinks really over 50% of negative tweets regarding Star Wars The Last Jedi were really by Russian bots? I'll put a link in the description to the actual research paper below and take a look at it yourself and see what you come away with. But when you break down the numbers and look at everything, I think it's pretty obvious what you're going to find. And that's less than 10% were these so-called Russian trolls and bots. So do you consider this fake news? Do you consider it just misinformation? Do you consider it just the media manipulating people? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe, share this video, and we'll catch you next time.